Just before we start today's video, we just want to bring you a word from our awesome sponsor, Endel. I know from reading the comments and the messages I receive, a lot of you struggle to sleep, so that's why you listen to my voice. As flattering as it is to hear that I put people to sleep by talking, there's actually a better way to get into a deep, comfortable sleep, and that's through the app Endel. Endel is an environment-based, non-profit app that takes a scientific approach to help you sleep. They've taken everything we know about sound and combined it with cutting-edge technology, so you get real-time, personalized soundscapes designed to help you relax, focus, and most importantly, sleep. Endel is informed by science, created with science, and backed by science. Endel is great for helping you sleep, but it also helps you stay focused and helps you relax. Endel has core technology that adapts to things like your location, the weather, and even your heart rate. Throughout the day and night, Endel complements your circadian rhythms, which is your biological clock that is in tune with nature's organic rhythms and cycles. What I thought was really exciting is their collaborations with musicians like Plastic Man and Grimes and philosopher Alan Watts. Personally, I love Grimes' AI lullabies, which were scientifically engineered for sleep. Even the first time I listened to it, I couldn't believe how refreshed I felt when I woke up the next morning. I felt like a completely new person. Right now, Endel has a special promotion for criminally listed viewers. The first 100 people to download Endel at the link below this video will get a free week of audio experiences. Stay focused, relax, and get better sleep by checking out Endel today. Number 3. Billy Trimbach. In early 1993, Billy Trimbach, his wife, Cindy, their 9-year-old son, James, and their infant daughter were living in Weld County, Colorado. Billy and Cindy got married on Valentine's Day 1992 in Carlin, Nevada. After getting married, they relocated to Weld County. Billy worked as a mechanic. Cindy had a bit of a sketchy past. She had used methamphetamine. She and her former husband, who was the father of James, had contracted HIV. By the time Cindy was with Billy, she had full-blown AIDS. Billy worked a lot of hours to pay for her medical bills. They even traveled to Mexico looking for a cure. On Valentine's Day 1993, which was Cindy and Billy's first anniversary, 39-year-old Cindy reported Billy missing. The body of 26-year-old Billy Trimbach was found that day on the side of the highway about 50 miles from their home near Wiggins, Colorado. Wiggins is in Monroe County, which is the county that neighbors Weld County. Billy had been shot to death with a 9mm handgun. The police believe that he was killed elsewhere, that his body was transported in a vehicle, and then it was dragged from the vehicle to where it was found. The police questioned Cindy and her 9-year-old son, James. Cindy said that the last time she saw Billy was the day before his body was found. James said the same thing. James said that Billy left with a man he didn't know to help him with something. James didn't know what he was helping him with, but he thought it was something mechanical because Billy was a mechanic. Cindy said some odd things to the police. For example, she said she went out looking for Billy, and she even searched the area where his body was found. The police thought that this was strange because why would she search that area? It was about 50 miles from their home, and they didn't know anyone who lived in that area. It turned out that Billy had a 9mm handgun, but when the police asked to examine it, Cindy said it was missing. The police searched the Suburban that Cindy was driving that night. They found a small amount of blood in it. It was tested, and it was Billy's blood. Shortly before Billy was murdered, Cindy had taken out a large life insurance policy on his life. But it was not paid out because Billy's signature had been forged. The police thought that Cindy likely had something to do with Billy's murder. They believe she possibly hired someone or several people to kill him for the insurance money. She may have also helped dump the body or picked up the person or people who dumped the body. This would explain how Billy's blood got into the Suburban. but the police couldn't find enough evidence to charge Cindy with anything. Shortly after Billy's funeral, Cindy and her son James moved to Butte, Montana. When Cindy enrolled James in school, she told the officials he had witnessed his father being murdered. James had a tough time at his new school. Other children teased him because his parents had AIDS. On April 12, 1994, 10-year-old James brought a .22 caliber handgun to school. As the students were lining up that morning, James attempted to shoot one of the kids who teased him. Instead, he accidentally shot 11-year-old Jeremy Bullock in the head. Tragically, Jeremy died the next day. James was too young to be charged with any crime. Instead, he was placed in psychiatric care. Sheriff's deputies from Monroe County, Colorado, interviewed him again about the murder of his stepfather. James initially said that he saw Billy leave with a man he didn't know the day before his body was found. But James said that he had lied and he had not seen his stepfather that day. He said he had lied because he was worried that his mother was involved in his disappearance. Cindy Trimbach died about a year later, on March 1, 1995, from complications from AIDS. She was 41 years old. In 1997, the police received a tip that Billy was killed to settle a drug debt. The police followed up on the tip and learned that Billy didn't use drugs and he was not involved in the drug trade. But they did learn that two men may have taken Billy to a house in Wiggins, Colorado, to intimidate him. What they were trying to intimidate him about was not made public. But while they were intimidating him, they ended up killing him. They were supposed to dump his body in a nearby lake, but they had car problems and had to leave his body on the side of the highway. One of the men was supposed to get some of Billy's tools after the murder. In 1998, one of the suspects seemed ready to confess. However, his lawyer would not allow him to talk to the police. He died by suicide a short time later without telling the police what he knew. Since then, the case has been cold. The police said the biggest problem with investigating the murder is that many of the suspects and witnesses abused meth and other drugs, so their memories are not very reliable. The police believe that some people have information about the murder of 26-year-old Billy Trimbach. The police are hoping that someone will come forward and provide information so that after 29 years, the case can finally be closed. Number 2. Jaryd Atadero. The Poudre River Resort is in Bellevue, Colorado. It's situated on the banks of the Cache La Poudre River. In the fall of 1999, it was owned by Alan Atadero and his twin brother, Arlen. Alan was divorced and he was a member of the Christian Singles Network group. On the first weekend of October, 11 members of the group were staying at the resort, helping Alan get it ready for the autumn. Alan also has 2 children, 6-year-old Jocelyn and 3-year-old Jaryd, staying with him. On October 2, 1999, the group planned a hike on a trail about 15 miles from the resort. Alan agreed to let Jocelyn and Jaryd go with the group while he stayed behind to work. It's not exactly clear what happened when they arrived at the trail, but it's believed they split into 2 groups. One group was people who walked faster, and the other was a group of people who walked slower. About a mile and a half into the walk, 3-year-old Jaryd ran ahead of his group. He stopped to talk to 2 men who were fishing. Neither man thought it was odd that the toddler was by himself because they saw a group of people about 50 to 80 feet behind him. Then Jaryd ran up ahead on the trail. It is not clear if he wanted to catch up with the second group or if he was in the lead group. Shortly afterwards, several people, including Jaryd's sister, Jocelyn, heard a scream. But it wasn't a scream of terror. Jocelyn said it was more like someone was trying to tag Jaryd. That was the last time anyone saw or heard 3-year-old Jaryd Atadero. When the people in the group realized he was missing, they looked for him, but they couldn't find him. 2 members of the group went back to the resort and told Alan that Jaryd was missing. Alan had the resort manager call the police, and then he went to the trail to search for his son himself. But he found no trace of him. A massive search for the 3-year-old boy was launched. Unfortunately, the first day ended without him being found. The next day, a helicopter with 4 people aboard it was searching for him. During the search, it crashed. All 4 crew members survived, but one spent 3 days in the hospital. During that time, the search for Jaryd continued, but still, no trace of him was found. The searchers thought that this was odd because the trail was through a canyon. There was only one easy way out of the canyon, and they found no evidence that Jaryd was ever there. On both sides of the trail, there were 45-degree slopes that were 1,000 to 2,000 vertical feet tall. They were covered with thick brush and downed trees. Since they couldn't find Jaryd, the authorities thought he might have been abducted. But this line of investigation led nowhere. Eventually, the prevailing theory became that Jaryd was carried off by a mountain lion and killed. Mountain lion prints were found in the area, but there was no evidence that a mountain lion attacked Jaryd. After a week and nothing was found, the sheriff's department made the difficult decision to call off the search. Over the next several years, there were several sightings of Jaryd all over the country. One man even claimed he was Jaryd, but DNA proved he was not. None of the sightings were verified. Nearly 4 years after Jaryd went missing, on June 4, 2003, 2 men were hiking in the area. They were experienced hikers, and they were doing some off-trail hiking. They were near the area where Jaryd was last seen, and they were hiking up one of the slopes. It was a difficult hike, and they had to watch their feet to make sure they didn't injure themselves. They climbed to about 550 vertical feet and came across a child's shoe. The shoe was in pristine shape. They looked around and they found the other shoe, which was also in good shape, a brown fleece jacket and blue sweatpants that were turned inside out. One pant leg was missing, and pieces from the sweatpants were spread out through the area. Birds had used pieces of it for their nests. The jacket had some puncture holes in it. The men were aware of Jaryd's disappearance, and they knew they had found his clothes. Using a bread bag, they collected one of his shoes and the jacket. The men arrived home late that night. The first thing the next morning, they went to the sheriff's department with the clothes. A search of the area was conducted. Within 25 feet, all the clothes were found. But there was no trace of Jaryd's body. The search continued, and 9 days later, in a crevice about 120 feet away and about 20 feet higher than the clothes, was the top of a skull and a molar. DNA testing later determined that the remains were Jaryd's. But those were the only remains that were found. During the initial search, people never searched that area on the ground because it was so high up. Had the helicopter not crashed, they probably would have looked in that area. Unfortunately, besides giving Jaryd's family confirmation that he was dead, the findings of Jaryd's skull and molar only presented more questions. Most people do not believe that he climbed to that height himself. So one conclusion was that he was dragged there by a mountain lion. Once there, he was killed and eaten. But there are several problems with this theory. It is very rare for a mountain lion to kill a person. Since 1915, there have only been 14 recorded fatal mountain lion attacks in the United States and Canada. Another problem is that the evidence doesn't seem to back up the idea that it was a mountain lion attack. Notably, the clothes were examined and there was no mountain lion DNA or hairs on them. Mountain lion experts say that a mountain lion wouldn't strip their victims of their clothes. Since the pants were turned inside out, it suggests that the clothes were pulled off Jaryd. A mountain lion would simply start eating the stomach, so the jacket would have been tattered. Also, Jaryd's shoes probably would have been scuffed up had he been dragged up there. Or they possibly would have fallen off earlier because Jaryd didn't like to tie up his shoes, and his shoes were not tied up that morning. His pants also showed no signs of him being dragged. Another major problem was that there was no blood found on any of his clothes. Had he been killed by an animal, there would have been traces of blood on his clothes. The lack of blood suggests that he was naked when he died, and animals don't strip their food before eating it. So what exactly happened to 3-year-old Jaryd Atadero? Many people believe that he was killed by a mountain lion. His family is not convinced. They think that someone out there knows more about Jaryd's death than they do. It's been over 22 years since Jaryd Atadero went missing. His family still holds out hope that they'll find out what really happened to him. Number 1. Melvin and Nimer. In the summer of 1958, the Nimer family moved from Orem, Utah to Staten Island, New York. 31-year-old Melvin Nimer was a surgeon, and he had been hired at the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital in Staten Island. Melvin and his 31-year-old wife, Jean, had 3 children: 8-year-old Melvin Jr., went by his middle name, Dean, 2-year-old Gregory, and 5-month-old Jennifer. On the afternoon of September 1st, 1958, the family went out for a picnic. About 2:30 a.m. on September 2nd, Dean woke up to a man in a white mask choking him. He was able to yell for help. His mother, Jean, rushed into the bedroom, and then the intruder turned his attention on her. They fought in the hallway, and the masked man stabbed her several times. Melvin rushed to the aid of his wife. He fought the man in the white mask, and he was also stabbed in the hallway. The masked man ran down the stairs, and Melvin chased after him. The masked man ran out the door, and Melvin ended up collapsing in the kitchen. Jean went to the master bedroom, sat on the bed, and called for help. But she was too weak to talk on the phone, so 8-year-old Dean spoke to the operator. Both Melvin and Jean were conscious when the paramedics arrived. They both said an intruder attacked them. Jean said that the attacker was about the same height and build as her husband. He was wearing a white mask that covered his entire head. Slits were cut in the material for eye holes. Before being taken away in an ambulance, Jean directed a police officer to give the baby some formula. 31-year-old Melvin Nimer died on the operating table not long after arriving at the hospital. His 31-year-old wife, Jean, died hours later. The police launched a massive investigation. A quarter of a mile from the crime scene, they found a bloody knife, but it was never determined if it was the murder weapon. The police thought that the killer might have worn a surgical mask or possibly a hospital bedsheet. So 40 detectives interviewed 950 hospital employees, but this didn't turn up any leads. The police watched the ferries and the bridges leading off the island for suspicious people, but this did not lead to any arrests. The police thought that after the murders, the killer may have fled the area, so they looked through missing persons reports to see if they could find any suspects there. As it was with the other avenues, this did not lead to a suspect. After the murders, Dean underwent 3 days of intense psychiatric examinations. Then the police questioned him. Then, on September 27th, 5 days after the murders, Dean did something startling. He confessed to killing his parents. He said he planned it a few nights before while he was lying in bed. On the night of the murders, he went to the kitchen and got a bread knife. He then went to his parents' bedroom, where he stabbed his mother and then stabbed his father. When he was done, he washed off the knife and put it back in the drawer. When news of the confession was made public, people were shocked that an 8-year-old boy, who was 4'4" and weighed just 68 pounds, could have committed the murders. A psychiatrist who examined Dean said that he had paranoid schizophrenia. But there were major problems with the confession. Dean, who was 8 years old, was questioned for hours by veteran detectives before he confessed. He didn't have a lawyer, and no other adult was present while he was being questioned. The police suspected he committed the murders because they didn't find any signs of a break-in. But this wasn't exactly true. For example, the front door was ajar when first responders arrived. Also, a window was open in the cellar. Just outside the cellar window, the police found 2 footprints. The police assumed that Dean opened the front door so that first responders could get in. As for the cellar window, dust around it wasn't disturbed. Also, they didn't think it was big enough for a grown man to fit through. So the police didn't think that the killer got in through the cellar window. Another possibility is that the killer somehow got into the house while the Nimers weren't home and then hid and waited for them to go to sleep. The police never addressed this idea. When Dean was interviewed, the police lied to him and told him that his father had identified him as the killer. They also said he would never be able to return to Utah with the rest of his family unless he confessed. It was only then that Dean confessed. But there were even more glaring problems with the confession. Notably, neither of his parents said he was the attacker. Yes, they may have wanted to protect him, but would they have done it if it meant endangering their other children? Dean said that after stabbing his parents, he washed the blood off the knife. The plumbing was checked, and no blood was found in the drains. The medical examiner also determined that Melvin and Eugene were stabbed with a great deal of force. It seemed unlikely that a slight 8-year-old would have been able to cause the wounds. Another problem was the fact that Dean was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. According to everyone who knew Dean, he was a happy and bright child who showed no signs of mental illness. In addition to all this, evidence was found to back up Dean's original story. His neck was examined, and bruises in the shape of handprints were found on his neck. Also, it was cold on the night the murders were committed. It is assumed that both Melvin and Eugene would have been sleeping under some covers. In his confession, Dean said he attacked them in their bed while they slept. But neither covers or bed sheets, nor their mattress, had any cuts or holes in them. Also, there was not much blood on the bed. There was a little bit where Gene sat down to call for help. But there was a lot of blood in the hallway where Dean and his parents initially said they were attacked. Finally, as soon as Dean was out of the custody of the police, he recanted his confession. Nevertheless, despite the many glaring problems with Dean's confession, he was remanded to Bellevue Hospital. Since he was only 8 years old, he couldn't be charged with any crimes. He went to child's court. It's not exactly clear what happened because those files are sealed. It's assumed that he was found not to be a danger to himself or others because he was released to the custody of his aunt and uncle in Orem, Utah. His aunt and uncle already had custody of his siblings. For a year, Dean underwent intensive psychotherapy. Dean and his siblings grew up in Orem. When Dean was 12, he started using his first name, Melvin. He went to Brigham Young University in Salt Lake City, Utah. After he graduated, he became an accountant. For his entire life, he was an active member of the Church of Latter-day Saints. He got married and had 3 children. He's currently married to his second wife. At the time of this video, he is 71 years old. No one else has ever been charged with the murders of his parents. After 63 years, it seems unlikely that the crime will ever be solved. Thank you so much for watching today's video. And now, here's a clip from our latest video, 3 boogeymen from around the world, from our new channel, Paranormally Listed. Number 3. Wewe Gombal. In Indonesia, there's a ghost who protects kids from neglectful parents. Wewe Gombal is a wrinkled old lady with fangs and breasts that hang down to her knees. When she was human, she was married, and she and her husband wanted to have children. After trying for a while, the husband realized she was infertile. He became frustrated and neglected her. He'd leave her for long periods, and she would feel miserable. One day, she followed her husband when he left the house. She caught him cheating on her. She became so angry that she murdered him. Their neighbors discovered what happened, and they harassed her until she died by suicide. When she was dead, her spirit came back as the Wewe Gombal. You can find a link to the rest of the video on the screen now. There is also a link to the channel in the description box below this video. Thanks again for watching.